Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have declared an amnesty for government employees and urged women to join their government. In a statement, a member of the Taliban's Cultural Commission, Inamullah Samangani, said the Islamic Emirate doesn't want women to be victims. This comes after President Joe Biden said he stands squarely behind his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. In an address from the White House, Biden blamed Afghan political leaders and their army for the Taliban's takeover. The U.S. has voiced alarm over Iran's production of uranium metal and urged Tehran to return to the nuclear talks. The State Department said Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Earlier in a report, the UN nuclear watchdog said Iran has produced 200 grams of uranium metal enriched up to 20%. A human rights group, Fortify Rights, says ethnic Karen commanders in Myanmar have admitted that their forces killed 25 men in June. The commanders deny wrongdoing, saying the men were spies for the military, which seized power in February and detained elected leaders. The rights group says the killings amount to a war crime. India has registered 437 daily deaths from COVID-19 and more than 25,000 cases. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has put the nation under strict lockdown after one case of the COVID-19 was reported in Auckland. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 95 more people lost their lives to the virus and over 3,200 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4.3 million lives and infected over 207 million people so far. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have declared an amnesty for government employees and urged women to join their government. They said the Islamic Emirate does not want women to be victims.
As the Taliban took over Kabul, the situation in Afghanistan is rapidly evolving. A member of Taliban's Cultural Commission, Inamullah Samangani, said that the structure of the government is not clear, but he said that it should be fully Islamic and all sides should join. This comes after President Joe Biden said he stands squarely behind his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. In an address from the White House, Biden blamed Afghan political leaders and their army for the Taliban's takeover. He threatened a devastating military response if the Taliban launch attacks. Biden said that the United States troops should not die in a war the Afghan forces are not willing to fight. Meanwhile, military flights evacuating diplomats and civilians from Kabul airport has restarted. This comes a day after at least 10 people were killed amid the panic.
For more on this, we are joined by Mr. Hamdullah Hamdard, a political analyst joining us from Afghanistan. Mr. Hamdard, thank you for your time. First of all, U.S. President Joe Biden, in his speech, held the Afghan government for everything wrong in the country and the situation right now. Is it justified for Washington to exonerate itself completely from any responsibility regarding what unfolded in Afghanistan over the past 2 decades?
Well, as an Afghan, I'd like to say that the U.S. cannot take out themselves of this responsibility in Afghanistan for the last 2 decades. Whatever they have done in Afghanistan, they have killed so many people in Afghanistan, and now they are leaving Afghanistan irresponsibly. This is not fair at all, according to all the international rules and regulations. They did not do good to the people of Afghanistan. They killed a lot of people. They destroyed Afghanistan. They used lots of bombs in Afghanistan. And now they say they are not responsible for the lives of the people. They did not come here for the nation building. They just came here to kill Al-Qaeda leader and to finish any threats to the U.S. in Afghanistan. This is not fair at all. They should have worked for the nation building. They should have worked for ensuring or bringing a strong central government in the country, and then they could leave easily. They could surrender the government either to Taliban or any other political parties very responsibly, and then they could leave. But unfortunately, they did not do that. Last night, Mr. Biden talked very irresponsibly, and he said that he is squarely supporting his decision and he will not regret it. But we, the people of Afghanistan, regret his decision. We regret their coming to Afghanistan. We regret their being in Afghanistan. And we also say shame on them for leaving Afghanistan so irresponsibly in a chaos and turmoil. However, the situation in Afghanistan will get better soon. People are trying to cooperate with the Islamic Emirate to finish these chaos and the looting which was done in Kabul for the last 2 days. Everything is going to get better soon, but economically, the Afghan government needs support. The international community should not leave Afghanistan alone. There are so many people. Afghans' lives matter, and the international community has to pay serious attention to that. Otherwise, they will lose Afghanistan, and the people of Afghanistan will be lost, and people of Afghanistan will have no reason to live.
Mr. Hamdard, President Biden clearly accused President Ashraf Ghani of massive corruption in aid money given by the international community, especially the U.S. How would Mr. Ghani be held accountable for these crimes?
Well, I guess that the U.S. and the international community themselves fostered corruption in Afghanistan. Whenever the USACE was giving contracts to the construction companies and to other contractors, they fostered corruption during that times. And through the first day of the U.S. and international community's arrival in Afghanistan, the corruption continued and started in all the departments, in all the organizations of the international organizations or the government organizations. It was not only Dr. Ghani's administration, even during Hamid Karzai's administration, and in all international organizations or NGOs that were working in Afghanistan, the corruption was a very common thing. International community should be asked for this as well. Not only Dr. Ghani, and all the high official of the government or non-government people who were running the NGOs in Afghanistan, especially the ones who were giving contracts for receiving so many illegal dollars. They all have to be kept responsible for this, and they should be asked for that.
Mr. Hamdard, we are already witnessing certain global players warming up to a possible Taliban government in Afghanistan. Short of elections, what do you believe would be the key factors that could lead to international recognition and legitimization of a Taliban rule?
Well, if Taliban want to be recognized globally, I believe that they should not stop women from working or going to schools. There should be girls and boys education, the university, the schools, and everything should continue. The media should work very independently like it did during the regime of Dr. Ghani and the government of President Hamid Karzai. The work should continue normally. They should not force people to stop working there. Unfortunately, I saw in some of the provinces that they even destroyed the barber shops pictures in which there were some haircut designs or some Western haircut designs, which is not fair. By doing such acts, they will lose their credibility globally. If they want to be credible or recognized by global community or international community, they have to get used to the normal government. They should become a little bit more democratic. Otherwise, people will not accept them. International community will not accept them. They cannot force the Afghan women to stay at home and not to work. They should let women work, and they should cooperate with them. And that's in the favor of everyone, in the favor of Taliban, in the favor of the people, in the favor of international community. Otherwise, those educated women and girls will have to flee the country as soon as they find any single opportunity for that.
So, Mr. Hamdard, what is the latest situation at the Kabul airport? Have the international forces taken any arrangements to secure the airport?
The situation of the Kabul airport was at its worst in the history of Afghanistan. We had never seen such a worse situation at the Kabul airport. The people were fleeing, and there was the military airplane of U.S. forces in which some Afghans, some youths were taken out of Afghanistan. According to my information in the reports I received, they were taken to Tajikistan until the next steps will be taken by the U.S. To transfer them or to carry them either to the U.S. or to Canada or somewhere else. But I guess at the moment they are in Tajikistan. They were taken to Tajikistan, and even some young Afghans who could not find place inside that airplane, they held themselves outside of the airplane, and they were just, they lost their lives when the airplane was taking off. And that was so sad to see that scenario. The international community does not value the lives of Afghans. They left Afghans in chaos. They brought, they were supporting the governments, which were led only by the Afghan Americans. They brought the ministers here who were the Afghan Americans. All the corruption made in Afghanistan was made by the Afghan Americans. Those money was taken back to the U.S. So it means the U.S. government and the U.S. is also responsible for all the corruption in Afghanistan. And they have to be asked for this by the United Nations, by the United Nations Security Council, and by all other countries who can make the U.S. responsible, or who can ask them for this responsibility.
Mr. Hamdullah Hamdard, political analyst, joining us from Afghanistan. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate that. And for more on this, we are joined by Mr. Sabir Shah, political analyst, joining us from Lahore. Mr. Shah, thank you very much for your time. First of all, the Taliban have softened their stance on women's rights, and today they urged women to join a future government. How do you see this statement?
I presume there is a lot of disinformation coming from Afghanistan. I'm not sure about the information that is coming to us. There is a lot of chaos and unrest in rest of Afghanistan. See, I was watching these channels like Russian television, CNN and BBC, and all of them are giving fairly different news. They are portraying Taliban as being extremely unjust and cruel, which is true in many ways. So we'll have to see for a few days till they form the government, and if they really mean that people from all walks of life should join them, and that they should not be afraid of anything, I mean, it will be pretty evident. Right now, I can see this country of over 32 million people embattled.
Okay, Mr.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
See, I was just hearing Pentagon has pledged it would evacuate these troubled Afghanis, and that they would send more forces and aeroplanes. No, this is a situation which they should have anticipated beforehand. And we were all hearing that the Taliban are 150 to 200 kilometers away. Now, Americans would also have been hearing all this. This is a distance that you cover in a few hours. How can Biden say that Afghanistan was captured by the Taliban much before they had anticipated? See, it has taken United States some 4 presidents 2,300 lives and over $1,000 billion since October 2001 to replace Taliban with Taliban. It's a zero-sum game. They've lost people here. Images coming to us are extremely disturbing and heart-wrenching. You see, the only thing we can seek solace in is that India is out of contention. It's out of Afghanistan after having lost $3 billion. It has set a lot of research and intelligence wing camps, training camps in Afghanistan, all of which stand abandoned now. So this is the only thing we can seek solace in, we can be happy about. Otherwise, I presume Pakistan, its government and establishment are not very sure how will Taliban behave after emerging victorious. They're surely doubting their beliefs and believing their doubts. And nobody can predict. Nobody can air a prophecy. I mean, in case they resort to cross-border terrorism, you and I both know they surely have a lot of sympathizers there in Pakistani mountains. We have been battling them out. So we have lost over 80,000 people and about $150 billion in this war against terror. So we cannot be sure about Taliban's behavior. We cannot be complacent about it. And what do you think? America will digest this defeat easily? Will the NATO digest this defeat easily? No. I think they'll be pressurizing Pakistan to accept all the refugees and create further chaos and pandemonium on its soil. We have already been suffering at the hands of these 3 million refugees whose second generation has grown up here, who have minted a lot of money here, and who've been responsible for a lot of terrorism, in my opinion, in Pakistan. Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Shah, yesterday Biden defended abrupt pullout from Afghanistan despite a criticism from the UK and Germany as well. What's your say on this?
Well, I think history will remember Biden as a good president. He's done well for the Americans. He may not have done well for the Afghans. He has done very well for the Americans. His predecessors, you know, they are solely responsible for wasting $1,000 billion here in Afghanistan. They tried to raise an army with an amount of $89 billion, but failed. They should have known this before. So basically, America has lost 7,036 soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan during the last 2 decades. 64,000 Afghans have also lost lives in this whole process. There has been an embezzlement to the tune of about $20 billion in Afghanistan. I mean, who's going to be responsible for this? Biden, I think he has done well for the Americans. He has taken the right stance. As far as the other presidents are concerned, I mean, America has been at war for 80% of its history since 1812. So it is a trigger-happy country, and Americans should blame Pentagon, CIA, and its own government, their own governments for all these loss of life. So Biden, I think, has done well. He has taken a good stance. You cannot capture Afghans. They have a history of fighting. They've been fighting here for thousands of years. Nobody has been able to capture them. You see the Red Army coming here for 9 or 10 years and then retreating back, and it resulted in the disintegration of the former Soviet Union. The British Empire lost a lot of people here. 10,000 of them were alone lost in the 1880 disease here in Afghanistan. You see, these are mountains. They are known to the mountains. Mountains know them. You cannot fight them with weapons alone or with the ammunitions alone. This is just a myth.
Mr. Sabir Shah, political analyst, joining us from Lahore. Thank you very much for your time at Indus News. We really appreciate that. And for more on this, we are now joined by Amina Khan, a political analyst, joining us from Islamabad. Amina, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Defending his decision of Afghan pullout, U.S. President Biden said establishing democracy and nation building was never America's mission in the country, whereas U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has been advocating and striving for unified, centralized democratic government in Afghanistan for years. Isn't that a blatant contradiction in Washington's stance?
Yes, unfortunately, there is a major contradiction when it comes to the American foreign policy, particularly on Afghanistan. Now, when President Biden came into power, we were all expecting, as he stated, that there would be a review of the process, and one certainly did not expect such a hasty withdrawal. One would have expected that from the Trump administration. However, having said that, I think the manner in which it has happened, we are all seeing that the Americans have clearly left Afghanistan in a very unfavorable situation, literally in a lurch. And I think even now it is very convenient for the Americans to say that the onus is now on the Afghans and that they have to sort out the mess themselves. If that was the case, then we would have not have seen this war prolonging for more than 2 decades. Now, I think still with the situation, unraveling, we've seen that the Taliban more or less have literally, taken over Afghanistan in a relatively peaceful manner. We haven't seen, a major exodus of refugees. Yes, there has been internal displacement, and we haven't seen a lot of bloodshed, which is somewhat positive. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this inclusive political setup, which, by the way, was a major point in the U.S.-Taliban agreement. And I just wish that, the Americans had secured this from all sides before withdrawing. However, having said that, there is still time to salvage the situation, and I think the Americans, I've always said this in the past, being a major stakeholder and signatory of the agreement, I think it is imperative they have a responsibility, and that is to leave, after creating some semblance of stability, and that means brokering still a negotiated settlement, if not with the Kabul regime, which no longer is there, but with the other political factions and the Taliban, as we've been hearing about this inclusive political setup. Now, the Taliban themselves have been talking about it, but let's be very honest, their concept of this inclusive setup is also very vague because they haven't given us a framework. One is hopeful that now that, the situation, it's very clear on the ground. The regional countries are pushing for this, and the Taliban also know that they cannot operate in totality, nor can they operate in isolation, and they will have to reach some sort of an agreement. But again, it is for the Americans to broker some sort of, an inclusive setup.
So, Amina, the US president promised the world an orderly and responsible exit from Afghanistan, but he admitted now that it was bad, messy, and far from perfect. What would be the consequences of this messy exit on Afghanistan and the region?
Well, look, I don't know whether you're following, but if you see the scenes, from the Kabul airport, that just shows you the kind of desperation, the kind of frustration and disappointment, the Afghan masses, feel and have been feeling for the, past 20 years, if we just look at, since 9/11. It's very easy to say that, it was a mistake. The fact is, again, as I keep on saying, there is still time to correct the mistake. There is still time to salvage the situation. And I think this is the responsibility that the Americans have. Because, look, for example, with the Taliban have been engaging with regional countries. Pakistan has had a relationship with them from day one. But the day the Americans signed the agreement, they legitimized the Taliban, and they conveniently ignored Kabul. Now, within that framework, the entire onus does lie on the Americans. They can still, correct the mistakes of the past, and that means by brokering, by pushing the Taliban. They do have certain, leverage points that they can, put on the Taliban to come to the negotiating table with the remaining factions that are there. And then, we still have Dr. Abdullah, you've got Hamid Karzai, you've got the former members of the Northern Alliance. So there is a workable structure that's there, and I think, from my understanding, that some sort of an agreement has been reached, but I think they're just waiting for the right moment. And I think within this week, we are going to see progress on this front.
Amina Khan, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, the world is scrambling to adapt to the new reality in Afghanistan that has unfolded rather abruptly. With the Taliban takeover of Kabul and the US withdrawal, only Pakistani, Chinese and Russian embassies are now functioning in the Taliban-led Afghanistan. More in this report.
As the highly fluid situation in Afghanistan starts taking some form and shape, the international community weighs in. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his U.S. counterpart Antony Blinken that it was Washington's hasty pullout that had a serious negative impact. This comes as Blinken sought the world's coordination to handle the state of affairs in Afghanistan. In a phone call, Wang pleaded to work for stability in Afghanistan, but he said the United States tries to harm China's interests. Blinken also spoke separately with his counterparts in Russia, the United Kingdom, and Turkey, as well as the European Union and NATO chiefs. Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov agreed to continue consultations with Pakistan, China, and others to enable an inclusive intra-Afghan dialogue in the new environment. Earlier, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said the United States does not want to be held responsible for its geopolitical experiments. Zakharova also blamed the United States for the chaos at the Kabul airport, which left 7 people dead. Britain, meanwhile, has stressed the need to prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for terrorist groups. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the same sentiments and pledged to do everything for the world to cooperate on Afghan matters. Earlier, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said the United States' defeat in Afghanistan is a chance for peace. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai urged United States President as well as the United Kingdom to take bold steps to protect Afghans. In an interview, Yousafzai urged countries to open their borders to Afghan refugees.
Pakistan says it will remain engaged with the US and other international partners for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said this to the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a phone call. Qureshi said an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan is the best way forward. The Foreign Minister praised the Secretary of Islamabad's efforts to facilitate the evacuation. Qureshi also underlined Islamabad's commitment to forging a long-term and broad-based relationship with Washington. Meanwhile, Saudi Army chief said Riyadh acknowledges Islamabad's achievements in war against terrorism and supported its efforts for regional peace. General Fayad bin Hamad al-Ruwaili said this in a meeting with Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. He thanked Pakistan Army for its sustained assistance in training of Saudi armed forces and expressed desire to enhance bilateral ties. Moving on, Barrister Sultan Mahmood has been elected as 28th President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf's candidate won with 34 votes against opposition candidate Mia Abdul Wahid. 51 members of the Legislative Assembly participated in the polls. The tenure of the incumbent President Sardar Masood Khan will end on the 24th of this month. The Chief Justice of Azad Kashmir Supreme Court will administer an oath to the new president on August 24th. In Indian-occupied Kashmir, police have detained several mourners during the Muharram procession in Srinagar. Local media said the people were also beaten after they raised pro-freedom slogans. The authorities also stopped the procession in Abi Guzar Lal Chowk area of the city. The policemen thrashed media persons for covering the event. Photojournalist Wasim Andarabi says an FIR has been registered against the journalists, including him. The authorities have also imposed restrictions in commercial hub Lal Chowk to foil the procession. The US has voiced alarm over Iran's production of uranium metal and urged Iran to return to the nuclear talks. The State Department said Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Earlier, in a report, the UN nuclear watchdog said Iran has produced 200 grams of uranium metal enriched up to 20%. The watchdog said this is the third of a 4-step plan by Iran. The UN agency noted the final step includes producing a reactor fuel plate. Iran's work on enriched uranium metal has angered the world powers as the technology can be used to make the core of a nuclear bomb. However, Tehran insists its aims are entirely peaceful and it is developing a new type of reactor fuel. A human rights group, Fortify Right, says ethnic Karen commanders in Myanmar have admitted that their forces killed 25 men in June. The commanders have been suspended from their post, but they deny any wrongdoing, saying the men were spies for the military, which seized power in February and detained elected leaders. The rights group says the killings amount to a war crime. The Kedin militia is one of the country's biggest ethnic armed groups, providing shelter to those fighting against the military takeover. In March, Kedin fighters seized a military post and the army retaliated with air raids. According to the UN, the clashes forced at least 100,000 people from their homes. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. India has registered 437 daily deaths from COVID-19 and more than 25,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed over 4.3 million lives and infected more than 207 million people so far. More in this report.
As COVID-19's Delta variant sweeps the world, hospitalizations are rising exponentially amid mounting vaccine hesitancy. In France, the number of hospitalized people has gone over 10,000 for the first time since the 22nd of June. Washington has issued an advisory against traveling to Turkey, citing the rising number of cases there. Amid resurging cases and crumbling economy in Argentina, hundreds took to the streets to protest against the government's handling of the pandemic.
Desahogo de todos.
I think this is a release for everyone after all the anguish of not being able to protest, because apparently it was bad to show anguish because of the pandemic. It was bad to suffer. But in contrast with what we saw last year, with restrictions of get-togethers that were broken by those in power, it's now a moment to recover from so much pain and so much injustice.
The Tokyo 2020 Paralympics organizers have announced not to have any spectators at the Games due to the outbreak in Japan. This comes as the country extends the state of emergency in Tokyo and other regions to the 12th of September and widens curbs to 7 more prefectures. In New Zealand, the first case of COVID-19 in the community has been reported in 6 months after a person tested positive in Auckland. Australian authorities have also warned Sydney residents to brace for a surge in infections in the coming weeks due to the Delta variant.
And we envisage that case numbers in the next 2 or 3 weeks will bounce around and are likely to go up substantially. And we have to brace ourselves for that. But our key aim will be keeping people out of hospital and keeping people alive. And that's why the vaccination rate obviously helps us with that. Of course, we need to see case numbers come down.
In Vietnam, thousands of jobless workers are fleeing after an extension of restrictions in the largest city of Ho Chi Minh, in the epicenter of the country's worst outbreak yet. But authorities are anxious to prevent them from leaving the city and potentially spreading the virus to other parts of the country.
In Pakistan, coronavirus has claimed another 95 lives over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the death toll has reached 24,573. It said more than 3,200 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said the positivity rate of cases declined to 6.68%. Pakistan's caseload has exceeded 1.1 million, while more than 933,000 people have recovered. The ministry said there are more than 87,000 active cases with nearly 4,900 critical patients. It says so far 43.4 million vaccine doses have been administered in the country. A U.S. regulator has opened a safety probe into auto giant Tesla's autopilot following a series of crashes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said there have been 11 crashes since 2018 due to autopilot. The probe will take in 765,000 U.S. vehicles with the autopilot built since 2014. Tesla shares closed down 4.3% on the news. Chief Executive Elon Musk has repeatedly defended autopilot. In April, he tweeted, "Tesla with autopilot is now approaching 10 times lower chance of accident than the average vehicle." And that is all for now. The latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.